This is 5 times Joe Rogan was left speechless on the JRE podcast.
And I've had one or two in particular multiverse experiences where time and reality has changed in a way that I cannot explain. It's so incredibly profound that I still cannot wrap my mind around it.
These are psilocybin experiences?
Psilocybin experience. So I think the psilocybin experience might be a one portal, and now I'm going to sound like Terrence McKenna, of entering into the multiverse. The idea that time can be bent, that there are multiple universes occurring simultaneously in different realities. And I've had one experience in particular that is just unfathomable to me. I don't know how to explain it.
Give it a shot.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. My brother John is going to Yale. He comes back one day, and he gives me a book that he's using for his class, but he's on break. And he says, and I'm really fascinated. Now, John went to Mexico, Colombia, came back with great stories of eating psilocybin mushrooms, and he was my older brother. I just idolized him. And he has a book called Altered States of Consciousness. And so I said, John, can I borrow your book? He said, sure. And I said, but Paul, I need it back. After my break is over, I'm going back to college. This is part of our textbook. So I borrowed his book, Altered States of Consciousness, and I'm just fascinated reading it, about all these different ways of expanding your consciousness. And so my best friend, Ryan Snyder, says, Paul, can I borrow your book? We're hanging together all the time. And I go, yeah, but I need it back. And so he borrows my book, and he doesn't return it. I go to Ryan, Ryan, I need my book. And Ryan just kept on avoiding answering the subject. And so I said, finally, give me my book. And Ryan goes, I can't give it to you, Paul. I said, why? He says, my dad burned it. I said, your dad burned my brother's book? I said, oh my God. And I have a shout out to Ryan Snyder's father that because of that event, it stimulated my interest in altered states of consciousness even more. So John goes to Yale and goes to the University of Washington. I have this DEA permit. I'm at the Evergreen State College. John calls me up. And he says, Paul, I think I found some psilocybin mushrooms. John said, you're really smart. You've been collecting Psilocybe cubensis in Colombia and Mexico, but they're much more complicated up here. I said, let me ask you a few questions. I said, okay, John, do you take a spore print? And he goes, yes. And I go, is the spores purple-brown? And he goes, yes, they are purple-brown. I go, good. Okay. John, does it have a separable gelatinous pellicle? And he goes, what's that? And I go, well, break the cap. These are growing on wood chips. Break the cap and separate the cap very slowly. Do you see a little skin that's translucent? And he breaks it and he goes, yeah, I see that skin. I said, John, they're growing on wood chips. And he goes, yes. I go, are they turning bluish? He goes, yes, they're staining really bright blue. I said, John, how many did you find? He goes, you would not believe it. It's a huge amount. I said, wait. I said, but he said, Paul, they're in a very sensitive place. You better come up here right away. So I jumped in my car and I drove up from Olympia to Seattle, about 60, 70 miles. I get to his house and John's there and I go, well, where are we going? He goes, well, we need some grocery bags, and let's get on our bikes. We go down there. I go, well, why all the secrecy? And then the problem is, well, you'll see. And it was the end of Boat Street. And right at the University of Washington, right off of University Avenue, there's Boat Street. And we get there, and right across the street is a police substation. So we're there, and it was an eruption of this mushroom. There had to be 10,000, 30,000 mushrooms, I don't know. It was about 50 feet by 30 feet, with all been mulched with wood chips. There was an eruption that picked up, trash and debris that picked up 6 inches. It was solid mushrooms. There are mushrooms everywhere. I've, to this day, never seen so many mushrooms in one concentrated area. And then we picked all these mushrooms. And so we got about 8 or 10 grocery bags full of these mushrooms.
How bizarre.
It turned out to be a new species called Psilocybe stuntzii. And so that night, we just about 4 guys from Yale, all neurophysiology, all scientists, on the scientist track. And let's eat them. Amazing experience. I bonded with my brother. It was beautiful. And then you're peeking at this experience. You look around, and there's like tens of thousands of these mushrooms. Like, oh my gosh! And so I go to bed, and I'm laying in bed, and full blown experience, and can barely sleep because all the colors are keeping me awake, and my mind is racing. And then I have a lucid dream, and I'm dreaming, and I wake up, and I go downstairs, and I go, I had this crazy dream. And what's your dream? And I said, I saw thousands of cattle dead, baking in the sun. I said, I think there's going to be a nuclear war. But what could kill all these cattle? There's a time the Reagan administration and all that, and the tension was really high between the Soviet Union and the United States. And they said, and they were joking with me, saying, "Oh, well, okay, when is it going to happen?" I go, "I know. I was in Olympia, and I needed to rush up to Darrington to stay in my cabin because my books were up there, my manuscript was up there. I need to save my research." So they laughed and they said, "Well, when's the world going to end, Paul?" And I go, "Well, it's not this weekend." That was like in 2 days. It's next weekend. So they wrote on the calendar, December 1st. I put it in my book. I think it's 1975, the end of the world. They wrote, "Paul predicts the end of the world." So we forgot about it. Massive rains the next week. Huge amounts of snowfall. And then on Wednesday, Thursday, temperature inversion. And it flipped to 75 to 85 degrees. All the snow started to melt. All the rivers were flooding. And my little cabin was right next to this river that would swell from from morning to night. It would go up 6 feet just from the snow melt because it's very close to this volcano and big glaciers. I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my manuscript, all my research. I need to get up there. And so I'm watching the news and the roads are being closed. So I had to go through Rockport, Washington, the back way in order to get back to my cabin. I get to my cabin. And the bank had eroded about 10 feet. I was only about 10, 12 feet away from the river now. My cabin was on the verge of falling into it, but I got my manuscript. I got all my books. I rescued all the material I had, but I couldn't get out of there because the roads had been closed. And so I had to wait 2 days, and the roads then opened up, and I drove out of the valley into the Snohomish Valley, and I went around the bend, and there the sun, it was a brilliant sunny day, a warm day, and there floating in the fields were hundreds and hundreds of dead cattle.
Whoa.
How do you explain that? I entered, I think, into the multiverse.
Whoa. I purposely didn't ask you or talk to you about the grizzly bear attack because I wanted to save it.
You want it?
What is it like to have survived, literally being 2 feet away from an attacking grizzly bear?
Pretty close.
Like you could have grabbed it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So we're on a Fogneck Island and we're hunting.
And a Fogneck Island is in
off
Alaska.
of Kodiak. Yeah. So a Fogneck Island has some of the largest bears in the world. They are big brown bears. They can be over 1,000 pounds. My brother and myself have hunted elk on that island before, and it's just a miserable place to be.
So this place is miserable. It's rainy all the time.
Rainy,
it's
high winds.
Thick, dense vegetation, and literal monsters.
Yeah. I mean, giant bears. The elk are probably up to 1,400 pounds, these elk. So the
Which
size
is
of moose.
way bigger.
Yeah, it's like the size of 2 normal elk. It's a big animal.
Giant animal.
And there's bears that eat those giant animals. So those bears are giant. The bears can be over 1,200, 1,500 pounds themselves. 11 feet or more. Yeah.
11 feet?
11 feet. It's nuts. 11-foot bear.
No. This one that attacked you guys, how big do you think it was, if you had to guess?
I would say it's 11 and a half feet because... because actually after we went in there, my friend who's a pilot there and dropped us off, he called me about a week or 2 later. He's like, "They shot that bear that went after you guys." Somebody went in there, same place, bear attacked them. They killed it in self-defense. It was 11 and a half feet and I think almost 1,200 pounds. So there's very good odds that was the same bear. Steve ends up getting an elk. We hang it in a tree. We do all the stuff you're supposed to do, get the meat away from the carcass. But we had yet to see a bear up until this point. And when my brother and I went in there a few years earlier, we just saw bears every day. We'd see 6 bears a day. So your mind's just bear, bear, bear when you're seeing them all the time. When you aren't seeing them all the time, you get a little lax. And that's where we really screwed up. Because the attack went down, no one was prepared. We were just sitting around having some sandwiches, and we're filming, and there's 6 of us all together. And I think that large group, that 6, is what saved us. Because when the bear ran in, it was 6 of us sitting kind of in like a semicircle, a strange circle. And when that bear came in, we did that scatter effect. And I think that scatter was kind of like if a lion's going after a zebra, they use their numbers and stripes to confuse the lion. It was that scattering of things just going everywhere that caused confusion for the bear. So I think the bear went in thinking, whatever's under that tree, I'm going to kill it. And it thought it was one thing. And then when we blew up into 6 different pieces. It just tried to kill everything at once and couldn't actually get one person.
God,
But-
that's so lucky.
Yeah, it was crazy because we're sitting down. We decided, we'll have lunch before we hike back, because the day before we hiked a long ways. We got back to camp at 3 in the morning or something. I can't remember, 2 or 3 in the morning. We'd barely eaten. So everyone was just thinking, let's have lunch, regroup, hike out. So Pat, one of the other guys that was with us, brought the jet boil to boil up some coffee. So I was going around collecting water from everyone to get coffee, going around. And when I sat down, I took my pack off, and the whole week I'd been doing this thing where I take my pistol from the pack belt and put it on the holster on my body when I drop my pack. And it was that weird deal where I took the pack off and I'm thinking about switching. I'm like, no, that's fine. And I thought I'll just sit and I'll flop have the pistol right there. So it's within arm's reach and I'll be sitting there. Well, I go around and get the water, and then someone had moved kind of where I was sitting. So I sit down across from the pack where my pistol is. And then I was thinking about, hey, hand me that pistol. But I just was like, man, you don't want to be that guy. Like, oh, yeah, the guy
that needs the pistol all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Not everybody had pistols. Just me and Giannis had a pistol. And then Pat's behind us. He goes, I hear something. And I look up, and that bear's like dead set. So Steve would be where you are, the bear behind Steve. So like Steve was between me and the bear. His back was to it.
Like how far away?
Not far. I don't know, 30 yards, something.
So the first time you see it, it's 30 yards. And is it
30
running?
yards. Yeah, it's dead run, super fast. And I just locked eyes with this thing. I mean, I see it coming in the whole way, just beady eyes locked in on me. And I think this thing's going to kill me. When I say I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm thinking. I just remember what was kind of going through my head at the time. I thought, oh, fuck, I'm going to die. And my protection's right there. Like, I'm going to die. This is that situation where I'm dead, and they talk about it, and he could have saved himself, but his gun's on the ground. And I think that was like, go for the gun was my whole thing. So I start to go for the gun. Giannis would have been here as I remember it. And so I start to go for the gun and realize, fuck, I don't have time to get to my gun. And it's 3 feet away.
Jesus
that bear is
Christ.
like right there coming down at me so fast. So I kind of do like a football juke move, left, right, and then wheel around right, do like a spin with my back, and then start running to the left. And at that point, Giannis, I didn't know this at the time because I looked at some pictures afterwards, kind of piece everything together. So Giannis was sitting right next to me. I think he got up to turn. There was some trekking poles right here. He grabbed a trekking pole. So probably while I was juking, he reached around, grabbed the trekking pole, swings around, hits the bear in the face.
Jesus Christ.
So then I see the bear running off. Then I see someone going down the mountain with the bear, thinking he's got someone. So I grab my pistol, start going down the mountain, yelling, "Who's missing?"
Right.
And then Garrett pops up out of the bushes, and his eye, he's like wide-eyed.
So Garrett, a.k.a. Dirtmouth, was the one who was on top of the bear.
Somehow he's on the bear's back. I think when the bear wheeled around, he like hit him, and he ends up on the back. So I saw just legs and bear going down the mountain. I saw his legs on the back of the bear.
So
somehow.
you thought like maybe the bear had him in his jaw.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Wow.
I mean, who would think?
Be riding a bear. Like if that was in a movie, you'd be like, get the fuck out of here. You're not riding a bear.
I think, what was that, Anchorman, where the guy's like riding the bear in the zoo? Exactly
oh
like
my
that.
God.
Yeah. And then we kind of circled up around the tree. And the real scary part was it was so thick you really couldn't see. I mean, you could see maybe as far as the wall is from us. What was that?
With the trees.
8 feet, yeah. And just real thick brush. And you'd hear the bear charge in again. And we only had the 2 pistols, Giannis and I. And the wind was so strong, there's no way we could have used bear spray. So we hear the bear charging in. And me and Giannis are like pistols out, ready, waiting for this thing to pop out at point blank range. And then it would, and you were yelling, "Bear, bear, hey, hey, hey." And then that thing stops. And then it would just, it would crash off, and then it would charge in from the other direction. So you gotta like circle around the tree the other way. I did that, I think, 3 times. That was just unnerving. It's like a horror movie where it keeps coming in from different angles. It was not a fun feeling. You just felt so small.
Wow. That's crazy. How many people have ever gone through a bear attack unscathed like that in a group of 6?
Yeah, and the thing about it was, looking at it later, had someone even been grabbed and mauled, not to death, but injured, I think that it would have been very unlikely that that person would have survived because the weather that came in was so bad. I don't know if it was 100-mile-an-hour winds. You aren't getting rescued in 100-mile-an-hour winds, I wouldn't think.
Right. You were just telling me something that is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. That you swam from Maui to Lanai.
Right.
And you're one of the only humans to ever do that.
I'm told I was the first person to swim from Maui to Lanai and back.
You're the first person to do it
The round
and
trip.
go back. Fuck, dude. Why'd you do that?
How long you got?
It started when I was a boy. They told me I couldn't do it. What made you want to do that? It's a ridiculous proposition.
I mean, to make a very long story short, basically by about the summer of 2005, I entered my first swim race, which was a 2-mile swim race in Lake Reston, Virginia. And I did it. And I was like, oh my God, I just swam 2 miles in the open water. You know, it was hard, but I was like, okay, that's the proof of concept. Now you just got to figure out how to make it 20, 25 miles. So I just, went completely psycho and ratcheted up the training. And then in October of 2005, I did my first Catalina swim.
Wow. That's got to be a pretty good feeling, though, when you're done. That you are capable of pushing yourself to what most people think is an impossible distance.
The feeling of crawling on the shore after you've been swimming for 12 to 14 hours is amazing. But what makes it especially amazing is that 6 hours earlier, you thought you were going to die. You start these swims in the middle of the night to avoid the shipping traffic. So that first swim, boat drops you off at Catalina Island. It's midnight. That's a darkness you can't imagine. Like, you can't even see LA from Catalina. You have to swim for 6 hours before you even see the lights of Los Angeles.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you see?
The stars and the bioluminescent organisms in the water.
Whoa.
Which is incredible. I mean, that's worth the price of admission. So every time your hand comes through the water, you're pulling and ripping these little things, and you're seeing the sparks. And you can't tell where the water ends and the sky starts. In other words, the stars and the bioluminescence looks like one cylinder.
Wow.
So for the first few hours, that's cool. But then, on my first swim, the water was incredibly rough. I had only swum in the ocean for 2 weeks before the swim. I did all my training in a swimming pool, in a lake on the East Coast. So now I wasn't used to how to keep the salt water out of my mouth. So then I was like puking my guts out, and then
While you were swimming, you're puking your guts out?
Yeah.
How does that work?
You just stop and puke and then keep swimming.
Wow.
And then my tongue started to get really swollen from the salt water. Because again, as I would learn later on, I would go on to do many more of these swims. But what I learned is the importance of spitting the water out of your mouth very quickly. So in a freshwater pool or lake, you get away with more. But in the ocean, you swallow that salt water, you're going to get sick as hell. So all this stuff's going on. So by 5 a.m, you've been swimming for 5 hours, you're getting cold. Frankly, just physiologically, like your cortisol levels are at a nadir. You feel horrible. It's like, it's a really bad feeling, and you're not even halfway there. And it's like, you don't know if you can do it, and blah, 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 blah. Well, if 6 hours later, you're now crawling out of the water, feeling like you've done this amazing thing, that's emotional acceleration. That's like the greatest contrast.
I can't imagine. What's the longest?
The bigger question is time in the water, because you rarely get to swim these in a straight line. So the Maui-Lanai one, I wanted to go Maui, Lanai, Molokai, Maui to do the triangle. Mm-hmm. And that would have been 30 miles as a crow flies. But we just, boat captain wasn't willing to do it at night because of the tiger sharks. And during the daytime, we couldn't physiologically figure out how one could suffer against the wind, because the wind gets so brutal in the middle of the day. So even the one that I did, which was just the there and back, I ended up swimming for 12 hours because on the first way crossing where there was no wind, it took me 4 hours. And then it took 8 hours to get back because I was swimming like the hypotenuse of a triangle, right? Like the current's going this way, so I had to swim this way just to go in a straight line. And I still couldn't. I almost missed Maui. I almost got swept out to Molokai just because the current was about 1.7 knots, which is about as fast as I can swim, maybe 2 knots.
Fuck. That is a ridiculous thing, man. Why are you doing this? This is maniacal.
I got blown up in March, and I was in the hospital. Previous year, I'd come off of a deployment, had 11 months before the second one was bit down in the dumps. Got divorced, had a dude die on the first trip, so it was kind of it was real rough to deal with. And then led into the next deployment. I was there a month. Boom, almost died pretty hard. Teammates saved me, and we had blood on the ground. Like I got blood on target, and then they made a hellacious movement to get me to the medevac. This little tour going on that coincides with the actual album release is donating to the Special Forces Foundation. So that helps Gold Star families, which are the families that remained of the friends that got killed on this trip. So there were 4 Green Berets and 2 EOD techs, and so that money's going to them, and that's what I care about. I'm alive. I don't have any legs below my knees for those that can't. Well, you can't see my legs on the video anyway, and I don't have my testicles either. So that's a different set of challenges. But
that's fucking awesome, man.
Yeah,
that's
man.
really, really, really cool. That's really cool that you're doing this, and thank you for coming here and telling everybody this. It's a great way to help out, and your music, you know, to connect it to that. I think that's just a fucking incredible thing. It's really cool. You know, when you were sending me the text messages telling me that you were going to the hospital, you know, it's very touching. And, you know, for someone like you who truly understands the consequences of war, like the physical consequences in a way that none of us will understand, you know, it's very, not just, it's brave of you to talk about this, but it's also, it's so valuable for everybody that hasn't served to understand what it really is. So thank you for that.
Well, I always say I really like combat because I was in a lot of it, relatively speaking. Bunch of guys have been in way more combat. Bunch of people have treated more casualties. I'm a medic, but I was in a fair amount. Almost got killed on the first trip a good handful of times, and then so I just don't like the war aspect when you see friends get killed and you're stuck in a hospital bed on top of all this stuff that's, you know, I didn't shit for a week. I pissed blood for a week. I've had tons of nights of excruciating pain. That's the life of an amputee. Or there are guys that are worse than me, so I'm just grateful for having what I have. And that's the beginning of it. Like, especially on ketamine, when you're going through all that and you're just like, I was telling like the people that took the trash out in the room, like, hey, I'm grateful for you, brother. Like, right on, brother.
What is ketamine like after a catastrophic injury like that?
Ketamine, I would close my eyes and immediately trip the most insane balls that you could imagine and open them, and I'd be back in the room and I'd be like, what the fuck?
Whoa.
And then a friend of mine, when I left my first rotation, he was an Air Force CCT that got blown up in the same village I had a few casualties in. He stepped on ID. He's an above the knee, some missing fingers, but when he was on ketamine, when he was awake and looking around, he'd see the walls on fire. And then there'd be like women, like white, pale skin in the corners, peeling the skin off their back. And he was like awake. And I was like, dude, that's
shit.
Like whatever. I don't know. It must be like someone's psychology when they go in, like set and setting type thing. But I was in it when I got a lot of ketamine. My legs are blown off. I'm getting worked on. I'm telling dudes how to treat me. I cut my own shirt off. And then I get the ketamine and I'm like in and out and I see these visions back and forth. And like I was convinced there are 2 distinct moments I was like, I'm not going to make it, and had that conversation. So, whew. And what's surreal about this right here is that you were talking to him on this show, and you guys talked about combat medics, and you were like, I just sing in key, and I was like, right on, they're talking about me.
Methadone's like, it is actually bad for you, isn't it?
Yes.
It fucks your. I didn't sleep. I didn't have deep sleep for 4 months, and I'd get in bed at 9, not fall asleep till 3 in the morning.
That fucks with everything too.
Yeah, it's a pretty shitty year.
Damn. And how long did it take to get you off of the methadone?
I mean, once you're off of it, the doctors were saying that it stays in your adipose tissue, which is your fat, for like 2 or 3 weeks. Because I'd have random nights when I was off of it and just get lit up with nerve pain and like getting hit with a hammer on my toes. So probably probably like 6 weeks of weaning that, and then I weaned another drug, Lyrica.
I mean, for you, it had to feel. I mean, because you were there at Walter Reed the whole time, you had to feel frustrated. But for somebody like Mike, the first time I came to see you, it was only a month after the blast?
At most, yeah.
So he was still in a lot of, I mean, more pain than I could even comprehend somebody being in, you know. from nerve pain for like how many surgeries on each leg?
It's close to 30 surgeries total, which
Yeah,
is a lot.
You
But
still
there's
had
guys
staples in
more.
your back too.
Yeah.
Before they taken. I mean, you could describe it. Just man, I was just like, how can anybody? You know, and then he was still, as he said the first time we met, he was high as giraffe balls on ketamine. But like, I was profoundly impressed by even then, like how clear-headed and articulate, and I was obviously this guy's obviously brilliant. You know what I mean? Like you just through the fog and awareness of everything going on in the room, despite the pain, he was trying to pretend like he wasn't in. And then that place was full of guys like him, and then when I went back, it's like all new faces. You know, these people. But then when I went back, the second time I went to see him was there for a couple of days, and it was like just in a matter of short time, it was leaps and bounds. I mean, he's in the gym on one leg, like fucking busting out 20 pull-ups and everything. You know, it's just kind of like there's got to be something anything you can do to help in whatever way. And these guys, since I've known him, I've never once ever heard him ask for anything. His only concerns were like for the families of the guys that didn't make it, you know. So it's just like really around an album release, if I'm going to have a bunch of attention on me, I thought it would be a good opportunity to put attention on what other people can do to help these guys and their families, because they're, you know, the sacrifices is, especially sitting in these rooms and looking at these dudes, man, you can't, you know, what do you call that?
Yeah. There's never been a period where someone on Earth that's human hasn't been going to war with each other. It's a horrible truth of being a person. And nobody knows it the way you do. So for you to come on and tell your story the way you just did, I appreciate the fuck out of that, man. And
I've been trying to understand the driving ideas underneath this globalist utopian tyranny that seems to be developing from the top down. And I think it's driven, at least in part, by this religious vision that I already described, you know, that you have to construe culture itself, especially industrial culture, as the tyrannical father raping and pillaging everything in its way, which is an unbelievably dangerous way to think, too one-sided. And the idea that you have to impose limits to growth on people in order to have a sustainable planet. And that's allied with a view that probably stems all the way back to people like Paul Ehrlich in the 1960s, who really believe, truly, that maybe the planet should only have 500 million people on it. And so when I look at ideas like that first assumption, you know, the planet has too many people on it, it's like, I don't like to hear people say that, because when I hear that, I think, okay, buddy, who exactly are you thinking about getting rid of? Oh, well, it's not like that. It's like, yeah, it's like that.
it has to be like that.
It is absolutely like that. And so, you know, it's easy to get all paranoid conspiracy theorist about the WEF, say, and maybe there's some utility in that. But, you know, I don't think anybody's sitting at Davos going, well, we got to scrap 7 billion people. But if the underlying narrative is the one I just described, you know, virginal planet, tyrannical patriarchy, and rapacious individual, and you believe, well, we're overpopulated, like Paul Ehrlich has believed since really literally the mid-1960s, then how is it not going to be that the policies that you craft stemming from that narrative are colored by the belief that there's far too many people? Like what I observed happening in Europe when I was there last was that, well, and you can see this, you don't have to be in Europe to see it, but it's more direct if you're there, is that it's pretty damn clear that the globalist utopians are willing to sacrifice the poor for the sake of the planet. You know, and they're doing that by cranking energy prices up through the roof, and that means that people die. Lomborg has estimated that maybe you have to turn your thermostat down by 3 degrees, right? Save the planet. We don't have enough energy. We'll pay you not to use your electricity between 5 and 6, which is what they're doing in the UK. You turn your damn thermostat down 3 degrees, that sounds like nothing. But if you're old, that radically increases the probability that you'll get a respiratory disease and die. You know, and if the Europeans would have had a cold winter, and that could still happen, Lomborg estimated it'd wipe out 135,000 people. It's like, well, you know, we're just making energy more expensive. It's like, what do you mean you're just doing that? So imagine the economic system. It's a pyramid. There's a bunch of people at the top. They have almost all the money. And then you move farther down the pyramid till you get down to the bottom where most of the people are, and they're barely clinging on to the edge of reality, right? It doesn't take much of a crisis to tip them into, death. And then you crank up energy prices. Well, what happens is you just take a bunch of those people at the bottom of the distribution, the poor that the left is so, hypothetically concerned with, and they're just done. They go from barely hanging on to not hanging on. And their kids go from having some ghost of a chance of opportunity to having none. You might say, okay, look, we have to save the future poor. And so now some of the present poor are going to have to suffer. Well, that's convenient for you if you happen not to be one of those poor people, but let's give the devil his due and say, okay. It's like, that'd be fine with me. Not really. That'd be fine with me if the consequence of your actions, raising energy prices, for example, actually produced an improvement in those things you wanted to improve. So, for example, energy is more expensive, but now the air is cleaner. But that isn't what's happened in Germany.
Right.
What's happened in Germany is energy is like 5 times as expensive, and the coal plants are back on. So it's like, even by your own criteria for success, you failed, and you did it at the expense of the poor. And, the World Bank estimated, I don't remember how many months ago, it's probably 9 months ago, that we're putting 350 million people on the brink of starvation because we're cranking energy prices up. And so for me, it's like, that's 350 million people. That's 3 times as many as the communists killed, in their 6 decades of trying. And if your cure for the planet is, well, we got to put 350 million poor people in jeopardy just so that things are hypothetically better in 100 years, I think. Yeah, I don't think so, buddy. And also, it's a little bit too convenient for me that your prescriptions to save the planet are accompanied by this insistence that the only way forward to that is to give you all the power.